Michelangelo Buonarroti was born on March 6, 1475, and died on February 18, 1564. Some quick facts on Michelangelo is that his full name was Michelangelo di Lodovico Buonarroti Simoni. For short, he just went by Michelangelo Buonarroti, but he was most well known as Michelangelo. He had the nickname Father and Master of all the arts. Michelangelo was born in Capri, Italy, and later died in Rome, Italy. He always considered himself a Florentine, even though he lived most of his life in Rome. Michelangelo was an architect, painter, sculptor, and poet, and is said to be one of the most famous artists of the Italian Renaissance. He always was drawn to art as a child, even though his father tried to discourage him because it was below his family's social status. His father, Leonardo, served as a magistrate for a short time in a small village in Capri when he recorded the birth of his second of 5 sons with his wife Francesca. They returned to Florence when Michelangelo was still an infant. He was placed with a family of stonecutters once his mother fell ill and later died. Michelangelo's father could tell that he had no interest in the family's financial business, so at the age of 13 he became an apprentice at a Florentine painter's workshop where he learned the fresco technique. After about a year at the workshop, he was asked to move into the palace of Lorenzo the Magnificent of the Medici family. He was there to study classical sculpture in the Medici garden. He even ate dinner with the family, which was something unusual in that time. His time there, from 1489 to 1492, was very beneficial to him. He was able to study under sculptor Bertoldo di Giovanni, which exposed him to well-known poets, scholars, and humanists. He was even granted permission from the Catholic Church to study cadavers for insight into anatomy. The exposure to the corpses did eventually have an adverse effect on his health. At the age of 16, he made the sculptures Battle of the Centaurs and Madonna Seated on a Step. Not long after, at the age of about 19, he fled to Bologna after Lorenzo the Magnificent's death. Michelangelo's Pieta. He carved the Pieta in 1948 after returning to Rome. It was for the same banker who he carved a Bacchus for his Garden of Ancient Sculptures. He used a drill for speed and achieved a highly polished sheen that made it fairly impossible to believe the sculpted figures began as a block of cold stone. The Pieta is a sculpture of Mary holding a dead Jesus across her lap. It took him less than a year to complete, and it is roughly 6 foot wide and just about the same as tall. Michelangelo carved the Pieta at 25 years old. Today, the Pieta can be seen at St. Peter's Vasari. Michelangelo's return to Florence. He was recognized as the most talented sculptor in central Italy in 1501. Michelangelo was then commissioned to carve the David for the Florence Cathedral. 2 sculptors had previously attempted the project and abandoned it. Once Michelangelo was finished with the project, it was a 17-foot dominating figure. The David depicts courage, sinews, expression, and the vulnerability of nakedness. The piece was a prized representative of the city of Florence. Paintings. The Sistine Chapel ceiling. Pope Julius II asked Michelangelo to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. There are more than 300 figures painted onto the ceiling. Michelangelo fired all of his assistants after the work had to be completely removed because of an infectious fungus in the plaster. He later recreated it himself alone and revealed the finished piece on October 31, 1512. The most iconic image on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel is the image of the creation of Adam. It is a portrayal of God touching the finger of man. And also, while painting the chapel ceiling, Michelangelo was lying on his back a majority of the time throughout the project. Architecture. Painting the chapel took a physical toll on Michelangelo. He began to focus on architecture, although he did continue to sculpt and paint throughout his life. Some of his architectural work included the tomb of Julius II, which he worked on for the next several decades. Also, the Medici Chapel and the Laurentine Library to house the Medici book collection. Michelangelo made chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica in 1546, which was considered his crowning glory in the field of architecture. More facts on Michelangelo. He had a quick temper and contentious personality. Michelangelo was unable to compromise and constantly wanted perfection. He never married, but was devoted to the recipient of many of his poems and sonnets, Vittoria Colonna. He died at his home on February 18, 1564, after a brief illness, which is just before his 89th birthday. Michelangelo's nephew took his body back to Florence, and he was laid to rest at the Basilica di Santa Croce, which is where he had chosen to be buried. The public called him the father and master of all the arts. Michelangelo is an artist who is able to achieve fame and wealth while he was alive, which is something that most artists do not. He was also alive when two biographies of him were published. And this is a list of my sources. Thank you.